Hello. This is a review of Exam 1. Hopefully this time I don't end up with well, if you don't know, um, if you didn't hear about this whole saga, I had one of these and then it was taken down for a copyright violation by YouTube. So that was interesting. I don't know what was going on. Maybe I got to check it out. I mean, they tell me what's going on, but it could be that they think I was violating my own music because I was using the podcast music, this beginning trippy stuff, and or maybe it was one of the images I had, but I've made sure that these images are open source. So anyway, we should be good now. All right. So let's review. Let's review this exam. Okay. So, lemmas, lexemes, lexicons, lexises. What are all these things? A lemma is the pre-phonological form of a word. What does that mean? It means it's like the images and emotions that exist in your mind. It's what will become a word. It's the things that form a concept, but they're not there yet, right? So if you think of Alexis, it worked out that I had this joke on the slide, I guess. If you think of Alexis, picture one. Let's say that you just picture, okay, let's not use Alexis. That's already here. I mean, you can think of one and then there's a picture. I don't think they have one that looks like that, but I don't really know. Think of a truck. It could be any kind of, there's like multiple types of truck you can think of. Whatever you're thinking of, what you're visualizing, that's the lemma. And then when I ask you what kind of truck did you picture, and then you go to tell me, you're putting it into a lexeme now. You're getting to the basic phonological word form. And you would say like, a semi-truck is what I was thinking of. And so there's your lexeme. That's actually a little bit more high level than a lexeme specifically, because we're saying like a semi-truck. This is the whole thing. But it really is the more, that's the linguistic version of the lemma that you were thinking of. Lexeme, if we're just going on like a word that's not really a concept like that, you think of ear. If you were picturing, if I said like picture a body part, pictured ear. Ear is the one, ear is the lexeme. You can start using inflections on it. You could say ears, ear-like, stuff like that. You can start molding these words, how words get molded to fit into sentences. And it's the lexeme that kind of gets there and then gets molded by the sentence. It has syntax and grammar applied to it. But the lemma is the concept. The lexeme is the basic word form. And then that gets, that gets acted on. A lexicon is all of the words inside of a person's head. All the words that somebody knows. I have a lexicon. These are the words I know. This definition is like a dictionary is also a lexicon, and it can also be all the words in a language. So there's really three definitions, but for our class, a lexicon is the words in somebody's head. And then also a Lexus is a luxury Toyota. Okay, so what about inflectional and derivational morphemes? Well, inflectional, this relates to what we just talked about with the lexeme. You can inflect it is one of the things that you're going to do. So you'll change the word to fit proper syntax. The part of the speech stays the same. If it's a noun, it's going to stay a noun. If it is a verb, I like to write, it's going to stay a verb. But we can change it in some ways. So I could say, I like to write. Someone else could say, about me, Dr. Patton writes papers. So it's changed a little bit. Is this one something he's written? So you've changed it to like past tense active. Yeah, he wrote that, but it's not very good. So also past tense. Infinitive, sorry, I should say. The other one is infinitive tense written, and then you've got past tense wrote. But all of these, like, it's the same thing. It's still a verb. They all relate back to the lexeme of write. Okay, so then we've got derivational morphemes, and these are actually going to change the word into a new form, a new word, essentially, that usually changes the part of speech. So that you might say, like, oh, well, Dr. Patton calls himself a writer. So we've taken the verb write, to write, and we've changed it to writer, one who does it. This is a derivational morpheme. But he studies language, so is he also a linguist? And so linguist, we've taken that from language. This is a derivational morpheme. All right. Okay. Okay. So morphological and phonological errors. If you make a morphological error, you think about morphemes. What is a morpheme? A morpheme is the intelligible chunk of a word. A phoneme is each. If you guys have had phonetics, so you know that a phoneme is like ch, p, I. These are phonemes, and so an error is going to be an error with that part of it. Ch gets dropped and comes in, or something like that. Morphological error. This is the bigger chunk, the meaningful chunk, and so here we've actually got like a problem with this meaningful chunk. So instead of a useful tool, it's a usely tool or something like that. A phonological error is a speech sound like ow, I bit my bung. That sounds different than I thought it was going to. Anyway, you understand it. That doesn't work if I switch it out for two T's either. Anyway, this was a weird example, I guess, but you're having a phonological error with B. You've reduplicated the B, so you've got bit and bung. So these are like phonological problems. Okay. Next, semantic trees. What is the NP? This is the noun phrase. What is the VP? This is the verb phrase. Where does the ambiguity come in? Well, the ambiguity comes in with the placement of the prepositional phrase. So like which of these noun phrases or verb phrases does it belong to? So we've got he looked at the dog with one eye. So we've got he looked. He is the subject. He's looking. What is he looking at? The dog. And then we have this prepositional phrase, and that's where all the trouble comes in. Because you can see over here, well, the question that we're left with when we think about this sentence is he got it. Looked, cool. At the dog, okay, we're doing fine here. With one eye, and we don't know if this modifies how he was looking at the dog or the dog. Does the dog only have one eye, or did the guy only look at the dog with one eye? Make more sense if the guy only had one eye too. Anyway, here you can see that we've got the prepositional phrase is modifying the dog. We've got the noun phrase here, which is the dog with one eye. And so the prepositional phrase is here, it's modifying dog. We know that the dog only has one eye. I just found this image online, but there was a dog with one eye in that Hawkeye show recently. The dog was the best part of the show. It was an okay show, but I also like the dog. And then we've got he looked at the dog with one eye, and you can see the prepositional phrase has moved The prepositional phrase is now under the verb phrase. And so we've got he looked with one eye. You could take out the other prepositional phrase, at the dog. You could take that out. You could leave he looked with one eye. Cool. So now it's modifying looked. Okay, so that's where the ambiguity comes in. Those freaking prepositional phrases. Okay, word substitution errors. So this, I think, is a tricky one for most people. We'll talk about why. So when you're at a restaurant, people don't usually say like, "Hey, I'd like a little bit more Skrillex on my plate, please," when they actually meant potatoes. Like, it just doesn't happen. That people just randomly search around in their brain for a word, and they're like, "Yeah, this is what I need." That's not really how it works. The substituted words are almost always related. And the relationship is usually clear to outside observers. Even when it's not clear to outside observers, there have been studies that show that it still makes some sense to the person who said it. Like, the words are still related to the person who said it. Now, I can't say that it's always this way. There probably are some people who just pull totally random words. People with Wernicke's aphasia, that could happen. Perhaps if you are impaired temporarily in some way, this could happen. It also, could just accidentally happen. Maybe you were thinking about that earlier, and for some reason that word was activated and came back in. So I can't say, it never happens, but almost always our substituted words are going to be related in some way. Related in some way. They could be opposites, categorical opposites, like king and queen. If we're talking about like the rulers, they're not really opposites because they're both rulers, and it's not like male and female are opposite genders or anything like that. But they're like categorical opposites, black and white in terms of color, absence of color, every color. So in that sense, they are opposites in that category. So we've got categorical opposites. We can have typical pairs like cat and dog, Scotch and Splenda. Tastes like Splenda, gets you drunk like Scotch. You can also just have totally related things, maybe synonyms. You try to say like this plate was hot, it accidentally comes out as this plate was scalding. You say like, oh, your booger got on my shoe, but it comes out as your booger got on my foot. Or turn on the light comes out as turn on the lamp. All of these are related. Now, the first two would totally be recognized as errors. If I said, I'm going to be the, I'll be the, I want to say like, I'm going to be the king of this place. I accidentally say I'm going to be the queen of this place. Something like that. Or I'm like, that cat is barking so loud. It's dumb. Example, but whatever. So these could happen. These would be recognized as errors, as word substitution errors. Synonyms can be errors. We don't recognize them as errors because at this point, the problem becomes like, is it an error, or is this how speech works? There are some activated words that could happen. These all make sense, and you choose one. So it's not necessarily an error when it's a synonym. It sounds like an error when it's part of a typical pair or a categorical opposite, but what I want to get across to you is that they're always related. It's not that they are opposites. It's not that they're synonyms, antonyms, blah, blah, blah. They're related. They're going to activate the same network of words, basically, if you think about it, like the attractor landscape or little dots. The picture that I showed you where there's a dot for bird, and then there's all these other words that get activated with bird. Branch comes up, stuff like that. Rhyming words come up with that too. So with bird, you'd have curd, turd, word, all this as well. So you could have substitution errors like that. They're related, but not necessarily in any particular way, just that they're related. And that's where you usually get your word substitution errors. Hey, what's priming? Well, priming is when one word is activated because of another word. Again, think about that spreading activation model: bird, cockatoo, bird, tree. When you hear bird, all sorts of concepts that are related to bird begin to be activated in your mind, your semantic lexical mind, right? Beak, feather, fly, all this stuff. And so when you have a word, it can prime these other words. And what that means is you're faster to recognize it. You're more likely to hear it if it's presented in noise. So like, let's say we have an experiment where words are presented in noise. If you're not primed, you have to have a certain loudness of word to be able to hear it. If you are primed, it doesn't have to be as loud. When recognizing if something is a word or not a word, you're faster to recognize a word that's a real word that has been primed than a real word that has not, etc. These are all priming. Basically, it just means that it's already kind of activated, so then seeing it or experiencing it in some way is easier because of that activation. And these are going to be related words again, just like the words that get substituted in errors. So doctor is going to prime nurse and vice versa. Judge is going to prime jury and vice versa. Bacon is going to prime eggs in the most delicious way. And also vice versa. And they probably also both prime pancakes. So delicious. You know, you can make a pancake in a mug. It's amazing. You just put the pancake mix in and then some milk, and then you like microwave it. And then you put butter and syrup on it. I hope you try this before your exam. Brain food, carbo load. Carbs actually are good fuel for neurons. So you should try it. I could even put a recipe on the Canvas page. Okay, so let's talk about the attractor landscape really quickly. This is probably the prettiest slide I've ever made. So the hill is the repeller. The basin is the attractor. So where's the hill? Here's a hill. This is a repeller. This is an attractor. This is an attractor. This is a big attractor. This is an attractor. Repeller, repeller, repeller. Of course, there can be multiple hills and basins. This is how we have things like errors. If there's a basin that the marble falls into before it gets to the target, that's an error. So a word gets activated and the marble falls into it. And so you're thinking about saying bird, you accidentally say beak. Listen to all these beaks chirping. It's technically wrong, but it's still weird. And so the marble, if you conceptualize it in this way, the marble has fallen into beak instead of bird. And then you say, listen to all these beaks chirping. So the marble is you, right? The marble is your conscious mind, your unconscious mind, your behavior. It can be all of these things. I'm not saying conscious and unconscious are the same exactly. They talk to one another. Your behavior is a mixture of both of them. You are a product of your behavior, all that stuff. So it's you. It's your behavior. Especially in linguistics and psycholinguistics, when what we're doing is really in all of our experiments, we're measuring behavior. So we can say that the marble is the behavior. And the attractor landscape is the way that we kind of visualize what's going on cognitively, or some of us do anyway, to figure out what's happening. So this marble is going to move along and it stops here Remember, maybe our target is here. So it started here. We're thinking about something. We're thinking about the next word. And we say he looked at and you guys remember this sentence. And so as we're going through, your landscape is deforming. And so as I started talking, the landscape is flat. You had no idea where I was going. He looked, and then you're probably like, oh, this is familiar. He looked, and then you start thinking, like, what was that thing that Dr. Patton talked about? He looked at okay. And then you probably remembered dog should be down here. But maybe some of you thought of one eye, because that's also going to get activated. You're trying to think about the sentence. He looked at the dog with one eye. You're predicting where the sentence is going to go. So you know I've done he looked at the. So this is probably like he looked at. These are all high. The marble's not going to fall into those. You've already heard them. Possible places where the sentence is going. Dog, one eye, all this stuff. And over here, there's Skrillex. Another aging electro person is over here. Paul Oakenfold is over here. So anyway, eventually, maybe, hopefully, when we get things right, which we get things right a lot more than we get things wrong, of course. So your marble may come down here and go like, one eye. Oh, but next is dog. He looked at the dog with one eye. And so there's the attractor landscape. Okay. Pauses in speech. Pauses in speech are a cool thing to research. I think they're really interesting. The reason is because they correlate with thought. We pause because our mouths tend to move a little bit faster than we're thinking often. You can hear this when I'm doing my podcasts or in this video or anything like that. There's times when I pause and think about, like, where's this sentence going? Where's the best place I can take this? And what's going to be the best explanation or the best metaphor? Something like that. They tend to correlate with thought. This is when you're planning the story, you're remembering the details, like I said, figuring out exactly what the best metaphor is, all that kind of stuff. They tend, because of that, they usually happen more towards the beginning, right? This is when we're really planning things out in the beginning. You're kind of like, building up where we're going to go with this, and this is how we're going to get there. And as you get more towards the end, you're kind of on a slope downwards. You know where you're going. You figured it all out, so you're just telling the story at this point, or explaining the topic, or whatever the conversation is that you're having. Okay, tip of the tongue. One of the cool things, tip of the tongue is also really, really cool. So you remember this probably from the video instructions that I gave you, also from the podcast. It was also in the book, so you probably are going to get this question totally right. You can remember syllables, the very first sounds, the rhythm of the word. So, what's a word? What's any word? I can't pull a single word out of my head right now. Back scratcher works. Very sure. Okay, so back scratcher is your tip of the tongue word, and you know that it's like some people can visualize. Like, visualize is not the right word. They have access to this information that it sounds like ba ba ba. I know I've already referenced The Office in this one time, but a great version of knowing the rhythm, a great example of knowing the rhythm but having tip of the tongue is Fancy Feast, if you know what I'm talking about. Because what's there, everything is but can't figure out that it's football cream, of course. So we have access to the first sound. I'm usually wrong on that. I'll be like, oh, that person's first name starts with a T. And then, somebody's like, it's Oprah. And you're like, oh yeah, T, similar to O, I guess. I'm never right about that. I know that a lot of people are. It just doesn't work for me for some reason. But I usually can figure out the number of syllables. If you're Italian, the study was done with Italians, although I would assume that this is true of anyone who speaks a language with where words have genders. They can remember the gender of the word. So there's a couple ideas of how tip of the tongue phenomenon works, like why it makes itself known. So the blocking hypothesis is where a different word is activated, and then having that word activated inhibits any other word from being selected, and in that case, it would be the correct word. And so, let's see. The organization. Yeah, this is a good one, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it's not. So the organization that governs soccer, you know this, maybe some of you do. It's some of you are like, yeah, it's this. Others of you are like, I'm not going to know this at all. Some of you might be like, oh, it's what is it? Well, 4 letters, right? And what might be coming up, let's just say this is happening, is NFL came to your mind. And you're like, that's not right. That's American football. It's not the same thing. But this is the blocking hypothesis. NFL comes in, and because there is something there, then your brain's like, we found the word, and it can't come out of that state of like, we found it, and it doesn't let you try to figure out what it is. Okay, there's also the transmission deficit hypothesis. This says that the lemma, the concept of what it is, so when I say the organization that governs soccer, is you kind of see it. Maybe you see the video game, the cover of the video game that is popular that has that name, or you can think of news stories where people have talked about this, and so the lemma is being activated. You're like, I know this thing. But the lemma and the lexeme are stored in 2 separate places. The activation from the lemma is not connecting with where the lexeme is stored. And because of that, the lexeme isn't activated, and you never pull it out, what the word actually is. It doesn't co-activate the lexeme like it should. And then there's also the incomplete activation hypothesis. This means there simply isn't enough activation to actually retrieve the word. This seems a little weird to me because sometimes you can pull out a lot of information, including seeing the person's face. Again, picturing the cover of the video game that has this name, all this kind of stuff. Maybe that's true. FIFA is the one I was thinking of, by the way. So hopefully if any of you had tip of the tongue, it is alleviated now. FIFA. Okay. Working memory. All these concepts are actually really cool. I'm a fan. So let's see. Working memory. I need to turn my I think my sound is peaking a little bit. That's a little bit better. Yeah, that's better. That's fine. That's good. Okay. So working memory. What is it? It's the number of items you can hold activated in memory. I should have said there. The number of items that you can hold activated in memory while manipulating other information in your brain cognitively. So, you know the example here. You're going to remember Q, you're going to do something. Remember R, you're going to do, like, is this a mathematical operation that's correct? And you're going to remember T. And then at the end, QRT. This is the thing that you remember. And then, congratulations. You have a working memory score of 3. That's working memory. We've got a couple different models of working memory. We've got Oberauer's model on the right here. Oberauer's model just simply says that working memory is the activated subset of long-term memory. You can see that long-term memory is all of these shapes without color and with color, everything. That's long-term memory. Short-term memory is everything that is in color. You see that blob right here? This is all the stuff that's in color. This is all short-term memory. And then working memory is what's currently activated, the activated subset of long-term memory. So short-term memory is in here, inside of long-term memory. Long-term memory is here. Working memory is everything that's activated currently. This is like the spotlight of attention. The focus of attention is right here. And so your working memory score is essentially how many things can be held activated at one time. This is the model that I subscribe to, but that doesn't mean that it's right. We don't quite know that yet. The Baddeley model is this one over here. 3 units here. Later it was amended to 4. After that, they added in a long-term memory component as well. So you have a visual spatial sketchpad. This talks to the central executive, and then there's also a phonological loop. The later version, there we go. The later version adds an episodic buffer, and then you've also got your long-term memory, language, and visual semantics down here as well. When you start adding all this stuff to it, it starts to look like a different version of this one in a way. This one isn't saying that they're all part of the same thing. It says that these all talk to each other. These are all different little nodes that can talk to one another, that are all under the control of the central executive. This one, everything is a subset of one another, and then this would basically be the central executive here. Central executive is like attention or conscious awareness or something like that. It's not, it makes it sound like it's some little dude pulling levers in the brain, like going on lunch occasionally when you can't think of things. But it's basically just like your focus of attention, where you're directing your thought, conscious awareness, stuff like that. Okay, so this is the Oberauer model. This is the Baddeley model. Working memory is made up of fluid and crystallized intelligence. What we're really looking for is we're trying to figure out just the fluid intelligence. That's the interesting part. That's the working part. But really it is made up of both. It's hard to remove all of the crystallized intelligence. The difference between fluid and crystallized intelligence is fluid intelligence is how can you figure things out, problem solving, things like that, holding some things in memory. Crystallized intelligence is what is the capital of Vermont? And there's other things that go along with that too that really affect working memory, which is if you're good at math, you're going to be better at one of those working memory tasks that focus on math. You're really good at just looking at a set of numbers and evaluating that. Okay, then it's not as hard of a task, because for you, it's kind of just like, remember these letters. You don't really have to even pay attention to the math thing, because you're like, oh, 8 plus 2. It is not 13. No. And so you can hold them in your memory. There's some ways around that. We can do things like look at a grid, try to remember where something is placed on a grid, because then it's not math, so it's trying to get rid of your specific component that you're really good at. We can do several tests on a person and then kind of like take what's common among them and say this is actually this person's working memory score. But essentially, there's fluid and crystallized parts to it. How many units of memory are there? Well, according to Miller, the magic number is 7, plus or minus 2, so somewhere between 5 and More recent estimates look at this as 4 plus or minus 1. The reason for the change is because of chunking. Chunking is turning several units into a single unit. I think the example that I use in the podcast is an area code. Like, I do not really think of 480, 623, 602, 520, and 928 as area codes anymore, as single numbers anymore. These to me are where I live, 480. So I don't even have to really, that one's like the least one that requires anything, because I just think like, I live here, 480. It doesn't even require that much thought. 602 is Phoenix. 623 is the west side, gross. And then Tucson, Flagstaff for the other ones. So this is chunking. I've taken 3 numbers, I've turned it into one piece of information. 3 pieces of information, turn it into one piece of information. You probably do this where you live if you have to dial area codes before you call. But then also if you're calling someone else, it doesn't work as good. Like somewhere else, I should say. Let's see. There we go. So here's a person that I know of. Their area code is 334. So if I'm going to call them, and for some reason the number is not in my phone anymore. Let's say I get a new phone. I'm going to call them or text them. To do it, I have to remember 334 and then the rest of the number. Whereas if it was something that I could chunk, I could just think like Phoenix. Oh, they live in Phoenix, and then the actual rest of the number. So that's chunking. Chunking is probably responsible for overestimating for 7 plus or minus 2. When you do things that you just cannot chunk, it looks like people perform more like 4 plus or minus 1. So somewhere between 3 and 5. Okay. Oh, there's that picture again. Gestures. What about gestures? So gestures are really great. They're important pieces of communication because they add a visual component to what you're talking about. It's like a whole sensory thing. And if you've taken 205 with me, you know that that communication is total sensory type of thing. You have to hear what people are saying. You have to see. It's helpful to see the mouth. The gestures add to information on top of that. So it's a whole thing. If you can engage every sense, you're going to be better at recognizing speech and interacting with speech, etc. Of course, we can do all of these separately, and we're still pretty good at it, but when you have all of them, even better. Gestures, interestingly, are processed or produced, either way you want to think about it, in Broca's area, just like speech. We've talked about that in class, but here's a picture of it. So here's Broca's area right here. And then right here, this is the premotor cortex and primary motor. So these are responsible for planning and executing motor movements. The further you go down, if you've had 310 with me, you should remember this. This is a good thing to remember. But if you haven't had 310, this is laid out kind of like a human, basically, upside down. So up here are the feet. Well, the feet are actually like down starting to go down inside the brain, but so this would be like knees or upper thighs or something that you're on here. And then you move through the torso, the chest, and then here you get to arms, hands, face, lips, and stuff like that too. Right here next to Broca's area, face, hands, etc. This is where speech is. This is a big processing area for speech production. And so it's interesting that gestures are going to be processed there too, because that shows that they're basically part of the whole speech processing architecture. They're here in Broca's area. or right next to where they would be processed in the motor cortex. And so gestures are processed in Broca's area, just like other speech components. Really interesting. Oh, and that's the end. Okay. Well, I hope that this was helpful. I hope you do really well. Most of all, I hope this isn't taken down for copyright again. That would be annoying. That's not most of all. Most of all, I hope you do well. Anyway, good luck, and let's end on this crazy, trippy. There we go. Yeah, that's nice. Okay. Good luck on your exam.